good. Arizona, it breaks my heart when I see my friends up in Canada with 2 feet of snow, or the folks in Buffalo last week with 4, 5, 6 feet of snow. It's going to be a chilly 70 degrees today, Val. I've got my sweater on already. 70 degrees and sunshine in the beautiful state of Arizona. It is lovely to be here. And oddly, Val, I was thinking about this. Oddly, the three of us live in the beautiful state of Arizona. And
with ties to Canada.
Isn't that amazing? All three of us have also lived in Canada. How cool is that? And as you know, me with my generations, we got 3 generations here, Val. We got a feisty Gen Xer. We got an old, worn-out hockey dad boomer, baby boomer. And we honestly have a completely respected elder statesman of the greatest generation, and that's our wonderful seniors among us. And they're getting fewer and fewer every year, Val. The seniors, these are folks 75 and older. No matter what, if there's anything as a theme of my life, which you know, and a theme of your life and your radio show and your news network, it is that we love to interact with multiple generations and really look to our seniors. They are walking encyclopedias until they pass away. And I'm feeling it almost my responsibility to glean as much knowledge about them boots on the ground experience. We don't need history books when we have history teachers who are actually there. So what a perfect introduction actually for Gordon, but that's actually true. What the stories he has to tell, and I'm simply glad he's still around with us to tell them. I don't have virtually any family left from that generation, and so not to get too sentimental here, but I'm looking forward to really visiting with both of you today, Val.
Yes, I am as well. It's a privilege and an honor to have both of you gentlemen on the show today. Greg, you are my trusted co-pilot, and I appreciate so much what you bring to the table and your perspective on things. And Gordon has been on my list, Gordon Kessler, for quite some time. I mean, this is a man with a lot of information that especially my generation can glean from, can learn from. And I really hope we can get the technical elements under control and get him on the show. If something happens and it's not today, I need to rebook this, and we've got to make this happen, because what he has for information is vital. You know, it's December, we're approaching on Christmas, and my generation right now, I mean, most of us have kids, and we're working hard, we're getting ready for Christmas, and then you've got the whole political mess happening. No matter what side of the border you're on, you can relate. Politics is out of control, and many people don't want to delve into it. And so seasonally, Christmas hits, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to forget politics and I'm going to focus on these happy things. But really, this is a vital time. It's that time in the game when you need to sit up straight and listen and pay attention. And Gordon is someone that provides perspective, because he was inside as an elected representative, an MLA in Alberta. And I think if he was to rerun, if he chose boots on the ground to get back into politics, he'd have no problem. He could just bring out his old garb from when he ran before. Maybe just change his campaign slogan to say, "Told you so." And I believe that enough people would vote on those 3 words, "Told you so," because it's true. What he was telling us back then in the 80s, in the 70s, when he was alerting people like, Alberta, wake up. Communism is close and we need a solution here. And, you know, people were just sidetracked. They weren't paying attention. Now, that next generation is. And that's who we're talking to today. Those Albertans who know, hey, we got a bigger problem than just unfair politics. We got a big problem on the horizon.
You just brought up a big point here, Val. A really big point. I mentioned this to Gordon, of course, Gordon Kessler. And I've mentioned it in the past to the, kind of the Sheriff Mark Lambs of our world, and folks that are serious and passionate about the country, their constitution, where our country's going, the disaster that we're seeing out of Washington, and of course out of Ottawa up there. And what I say to both of these gentlemen, at one point I'd said, do you ever get tired about having been right all along? Whether it is the COVID lockdowns, Hillary Clinton would be president had Donald Trump not colluded with Russia, the Hunter Biden laptops, a nothing burger, on and on. If we pay money out of pocket to the government for carbon tax, out of pocket, we'll have a cleaner environment and a happier world. And this has been, quote, rammed down our throat for 2 years now, Val. That's how my friends feel about it. And don't you feel tired of being right about this stuff all along? And Mark Lamb, I remember Sheriff Lamb, he said, the Democrats owe us an apology. Just wait for that, right? But it's true. And no matter what, when we bring someone of a Gordon Kessler's stature and experience to the table in a conversation like this, I said to him a while back, doesn't it feel great to be recognized again? Doesn't it feel great? I mean, I'm in my 60s. Doesn't it feel great to kind of have a body of work and again with the wonderful internet and communication and Twitter Spaces and Val Olson News and Alberta 51 Group and the Stu Peters Network and all of these platforms, Val, that are listening or hearing not only this broadcast, but others kind of that we work with together. And Gordon Kessler is a gentleman where I said, it's incredible that your message from 1983, oddly, that's the first year that I left Quebec for the United States, but since 1983, Gordon's been right all along. His conclusion back then and now is Alberta 51 is now the only answer, Val Olson, the only answer to the oppression we're seeing up in Canada and the absolute grease fire the United States is under Joe Biden. Apologize for the mic time here, but I think I had to get that off my chest. But that's a great, at least, intro and appreciation for how far ahead of his time Gordon Kessler was and is, and how important, how crucial his message is today in 2022. So here you go, Mike. Back to you, Val. Thank you for giving me that little mini rant. I appreciate it. I really do.
You addressed some important stuff, and due to technical issues, it looks like Gordon is not on the broadcast. But the next best thing is I've got a couple of clips that I'm going to play because it's important information right now. If you want to timestamp anything, when we're looking at what's happening in Alberta politics and choices that we just don't have, that aren't ours to make. And that boils down really to government overreach. And so Gordon Kessler, as we said, has been talking about this stuff for some time. So I invite listeners, listen closely to Gordon Kessler, who was on the Americanuck radio program with Mike Phillip. And you'll hear what Gordon has to say addressing communism in Alberta.
Pete, you've been around for a long time. This is my opinion on the NDP, okay, Mr. Kessler? They think that they're the new social credit party. They somehow think that they're the successors. But it is my opinion, Gordon, that the NDP absolutely would not even exist in this country if it wasn't for the media. It's like they're a media creation. Traditionally, they only held 2 seats in Parliament, but they just kept getting plugged and kept getting featured, and they keep going to them for sound bites. And I honestly don't think they would even exist without media coverage.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was in the legislature, one of my assistants was able to get a copy of the agenda of Grant Notley, Rachel's dad.
Yeah.
And he brought me a copy of it, and whether or not he should have had it doesn't matter. I ended up with a copy of it in my desk, and it was basically the Communist Manifesto. That's what it was. So even then, they talked about Grant Notley being a kind socialist, but just like all socialists, they're very patient, and their agenda is. I used to say, well, socialism, a little bit of socialism, it's like being a little bit pregnant. It just give it enough time, and it becomes something other than a little bit. And that's the way I viewed it. Grant Notley treated me well there, but his goal was to implement a communist agenda in Alberta, and his daughter's doing the same thing.
That's really interesting that you bring that.
What'd you think of that, Greg?
Well, that's a great big wow, all caps, and 3 exclamation points. When I first heard that, and you remember, Val, you heard this clip virtually real time, and have graciously reshared it here today. I featured it on my YouTube channel because it's so important especially for Albertans to know. Oh, goodness gracious! Do we have a Kessler on the line?
Not yet.
Okay, that was the tape. Anyhow, I was amazed because Val, he basically has provided with this clip. Gordon has provided, I call it forensic evidence. I mean, forensic evidence that indeed, back in the 60s, it was not a conspiracy theory to think that communism was trying to infiltrate itself into the United States and Canada, parachuting right into our campuses. And communism, literally Marxist, right out of the old Soviet Union, right out of what we see from China these days as far as human rights violations and oppression. And that actually existed because it was a document in Ralph Notley, and you can provide some history there as far as who he is. A lot of my American readers and listeners don't know who the Notleys are. But the communism, the concept that communism was infiltrated into our society, into our media, into Hollywood, into everything else. There's proof in the pudding right there, as my aunts in England would say. Proof in the pudding, Val. I can't wait to chat with Gordon directly, whether it's now or a wonderful follow-up episode, which we can do soon. But I can't wait to hear from it, because that is, as I say, it's called forensic evidence. The Communist Manifesto being in the desk of Ralph Notley, Grant Notley. Are you kidding? So there we go. I'll turn the mic over to you right there, Val.
Well, it sounds like he was in an environment where he was seeing things and obviously had proof right in his very own hands as to what was going on. Some secret communist activity, because I don't recall ever hearing that. That's breaking news as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
And, maybe you can educate me a little bit, Greg, on, is communist activity, when it's spotted in your community, what are you supposed to do with that information anyways? Where do you take it? What do you do with it? Is it criminal? Is it illegal?
Well, it should be. And boy, that's a loaded, open-ended question there, Val. What do we do about it? Is it real, number one? Number one, is communism real, and does it really want to infiltrate itself into our culture? That's the $64,000 question, back when 64 grand actually was some money. But does it? And my answer, of course, anyone who's researched it, is not, of course. I mean, no question. We see left and right, not only communist, but heavy socialist things. I mean, right, even built into our programs right now. There's nothing against social programs like, the welfare world and stuff, and a lot of these these government programs out there. Absolutely nothing against them, but they virtually are kind of community-funded care program for all citizens. Nothing wrong with that. That was the wonderful thing about socialism / leaning towards communism. But my theory all along was that Marxism, my theory, is based on some incredible authors that are way smarter than me. Thomas Sowell, Sowell.
I think
Gordon,
we've got company, Greg.
well, goodness.
Gordon, are you there?
Are we here?
Yes. Welcome to the show. How exciting.
Oh man, my technical prowess is showing.
Well, you're here now, and that's the important part. So I want to revisit where we left off. We played a clip of you from an earlier interview with Mike Phillip on American Radio Network, and you were talking about in the legislature what went down on a particular day. And I think this is huge. I think that this is really big. So walk us back to that day when you were confronted with information that confirmed communist activity in the Alberta government back in the 80s.
Well, as you know, in the legislature, each of the members have assigned aides, or you get your own, and if you don't, the legislature will help you get the aides that you need. And I had a young man there that was good friends with one of Grant Notley's aides, and he happened to divulge some information to my aide, and he said he'd like to look at it, of course, and he ended up with it in his possession, and he delivered it to my office. And it was the agenda for changing a free market system to a communist system. And in that agenda, it outlined the things that were necessary in order to accomplish that goal. I don't have it with me, but I do remember several of them. There were about 10 of them, and I remember at least 5 of them. One of them was to promote homosexuality, and let me look here. Oh, and the feminization of the entire male population. So not only was
so like breaking down the family unit. Is that what that would mean?
Exactly, and that came later. It said to break down and destroy traditional family units. That was one of them as well. The other was to use to get the population hooked on drugs, marijuana, and other drugs. And then another one was to infiltrate the religious institutions and replace them with government programs and make the government more substantial than the religions that they were part of. And finally, the takeover of the educational institutions. And those are 5 that I distinctly remember. So I think that we've seen all of that happen. I mean, it's been 40 years since I was in the ledge, but all of these things have come to fruition. And they started long before 1980. These things have been, you go back to the time of Karl Marx, and if you read on Karl Marx, these were the things that he promoted. He wanted to replace religion with political movements, mainly Marxist movement at that time. But if you read Karl Marx, he was not a socialist at heart. He was a communist. And all of these so-called socialist political parties like the NDP, Karl Marx is their hero, and they failed to tell the public that his ultimate goal was to replace all kinds of political philosophy with Marxism. And so, yeah, it was rather shocking at the time, but all of those things have certainly come to fruition in the last years, and more dramatically here in the last 20 probably. We're seeing the acceleration. And of course, they don't do it. They didn't used to do it openly. They were more selective in how they did it. Now they're much more open about it. It used to be a very incremental implementation of policy, but those incremental implementations of policy have changed dramatically, and now it's just like the bill that they just passed here in the last couple of days in the United States, where it's called the something or other Marriage Act, and it basically does away with traditional marriage, traditional families, and penalizes traditional families and encourages all of these alternate lifestyles. So now we have it in the legislature and in the bills that are being passed. And sadly, 12 Republicans joined in the vote with the Democrats to destroy and break down, traditional family units. So these things all go back to that memo that I was able to get my hands on back in the 80s. Yeah.
That's a lot that you've just dropped on us, and important, very, very important information. Let's go back to that time when you were given the document. Did you think, well, this is just crazy talk, it's taboo, this is never going to fly? Or did you take it seriously, and what did you do?
Well, I took it very seriously. It was interesting. Later on, I was in a conversation with Grant Notley, and he sat about three seats away from me, and he approached me and he said, "Gordon, I want you to know," he said, "that anything we can do to undermine the Conservative Party," he said, "I will work with you. If you're going after him on a certain topic that I can agree with," he said, "I'll do everything I can to support you in the legislature." And he said, "Now, don't get me wrong." He said, I'm not becoming a conservative." He said, "In fact," he said, I'm completely on the opposite end of the scale." And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm a radical conservative, so that must mean you're a radical communist." And he just smiled and he said, "That would be correct."
Wow.
Yeah. So it was kind of a fun time in my life to see, behind the scenes. And he had an aide there who dressed like Karl Marx. He had the big beard and the bushy hair, and came to work with army boots and a pair of striped coveralls. That was his attire every day at the legislature. And I'm sure he was supposed to represent the working class, the downtrodden, but he ended up going to Ottawa as an elected member of the federal government.
Wow, that's quite a picture. I want to go into your thoughts on infiltration, because one thing I've noted in Canadian politics is, he wasn't scared to tell you who he was. And it seems like they're really not. They tell you up front what their agenda is. But the infiltration that happens, the takeover, say, of a Conservative Party, what does that look like when you've got communists inside, say, what should be a Conservative or Republican Party? What happens?
Well, I think all you have to do is take a look at what's going on in the U.S. Congress, and it becomes pretty obvious when we have so-called Republicans. Now, they're rhinos, Republican name only, but they're leftists who have infiltrated the Republican Party, and slowly they vote with the left. They implement leftist laws that affect society, and they remain in the Republican Party and profess that they're conservatives. But every issue that comes up, they vote with the left, so you know where they're coming from. They are, and it's easy to tell who they are. I mean, with this vote on the Marriage Act, 12 of those Republicans voted to support that act to destroy traditional marriages and traditional families. So they're pretty brazen, and they're pretty obvious to spot once you start watching their votes.
That's right. Watching the votes, going source, not just accepting, say, what the TV tells you, but paying attention to the agenda of the elected officials, and maybe not just relying because they fly a conservative flag or identify as conservative, but pay attention to your loss of freedoms. I want to zone into Alberta because you had an eagle eye perspective. You've been in the game for a long time. Where we're at today, my generation really has to stand up, and we can't afford to make mistakes and take our eyes off the game. What advice do you have for my generation? How do we fix this? Can Alberta be saved? What is the best plan for Alberta?
I think the best plan for Alberta is to become the 51st state. But before I, elaborate on that at all, I think that what needs to happen, we've got a new premier in Alberta, in Danielle Smith, and she maintains that she's a conservative. And I think the best way to find out is to follow what she does with realigning the education system in the province. The left are very patient. They're very patient and they're very clever. And they start out by infiltrating local governments, and then they infiltrate higher levels of government. But the most important thing they do is they infiltrate the education system. At one time, that infiltration was relegated to the universities and higher learning institutions. But over the years, they become more and more blatant. And as the teachers' unions have become more militant and more leftist, they're churning out all of these young Marxist minds. And so now they're actually infiltrating our lower level grades into the elementary and middle schools and indoctrinating these young people. And they come out of those universities and they've been taught for 12 or 14 years that Marxism is the way to go and that capitalism is the enemy and free markets are the enemy. And I think that it's time that somebody take the lead and show some courage and pass some laws that restrict the things that can be taught in our schools. And if they're going to present communism as a utopian way of life, they should be mandated to teach free enterprise and all the good things that the free market system has done for people of North America, and that the greatness of North America came about because of free markets, not because of communism. And they need to devote equal time to show what Marxism has done in countries in South America and in Africa and the continent of Africa, so that they get a rounded understanding of what the advantage of one system is over the other, instead of just preaching one side of it. And I would hope that she would take a look at that and make some changes. We'll see. Because I think that if we don't start, these young people, as you know, Val, it's the older generation who are concerned about the future. The younger generation are not as involved in politics as the older generation were, and we need to come up with a way to get these young people involved and help them to understand the importance of their future. If they don't, if they fail to get involved, they're going to get the kind of government that they deserve. Simple as that.
Well, I want to address indoctrination that's happened. My advice is always go source. Don't assume anything. Go into your kids' classrooms. Look at the textbooks. Get to know who is Danielle Smith. I listened to many of her programs. I listened to what she had to say on the radio. I looked at the policies she supported, and when it came to supporting children in schools who identified as their opposite gender or had changed their gender, she was very much, she was adamantly in support and outspoken on children's rights to go to a teacher or an adult for that matter, and that secret should be kept from the parents.
Yeah.
So that was her position for quite some time. And I think it's important that we hold those points to her and we have her talk about those points now. Because as somebody, or as a parent myself, I'm not interested in my child keeping secrets from me with other adults. And the fact that a politician wants to get between me and my child and encourage that behavior is not a good sign. It's also, I think, if we really get to the root of it, it's really not conservative or libertarian for that matter. There's, Danielle Smith posting a libertarian flag in one of her recent videos. Now, if you're going to stand in front of that flag and symbolize individual rights and freedoms, but meanwhile do things that are anti-parental rights, there's a conflict there. So that's definitely an area that I think needs to be addressed. Absolutely. With Danielle Smith.
I totally agree. And that's one of my concerns about Danielle Smith is that her economic policies may be conservative, but I see that her social policies are on the left, way on the left. There should be absolutely no tolerance for any teacher at any level. I mean, I don't. When somebody reaches the age of 18, they're going to make their own decisions. But at 18, they're not allowed to drink. But at 18, they can make some decisions. But these young kids going into elementary schools that are being allowed to are being propagandized into this gender theory, and they can be any gender they want. There's two genders, male and female. And now we've got these teachers that are telling them that they can be a cat if they want, and they've got sandboxes in the room for the cat and for the fox and for the dog. And that she needs to stand up. They need to pass a bill that will stop that, because that's one of the goals, destroying traditional families. That's one of the goals that were listed on that sheet. And if that's not destroying traditional families from the elementary age up, nothing is. So I'm adamant about that. I mean, yes. It needs to, actually, in my opinion, if they're teaching kids under the age of 18 gender identity, in my opinion, they should be charged. It should be a federal or a provincial offense.
Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, what a fascinating conversation. I'm really enjoying sitting back and listening to it. Mr. Gordon Kessler's delivering today, isn't he, Val? I mean, seriously, this is what it's all about. I want to, as both of you know, I just want to interject real quick on the education world. Both of you are talking so poignantly about the grease fire that is today's education mess. It's just a mess. And both of you know, you well know, that education's right there as far as being the closest to my heart, because my mom was a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher, and my great grandmother was a teacher. I still tell the story of my grandmother in Montreal. You would have loved her, Val. She first taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Dorval, Quebec, right outside of Montreal, all 7 grades in one schoolhouse. And to this day on Facebook, 50, 60 years later, I hear folks that said their life was changed by my grandmother in the 1940s or 50s. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what public education was supposed to be all about. It was about my grandmother. It was about my mother in the 1960s and 70s that was the most fabulous public school teacher you've ever seen, where we included the parents, we included the students, and we included the teachers, and that was it. That's where the decisions were made. Both of you also know that I love solutions. We can bring up issues, but I love solutions. And really, just to wrap it up here and look for both of your comments. I always say, don't reinvent the wheel. Usually, most wheels have been invented, and everything's you can be Googled on the internet right now. There's an answer to education that answers all of your concerns, Val, and all of your concerns, Gordon, and my concerns, and that's what Arizona has just done. They went to a quote school voucher program universally through the state of Arizona. 1.3 or 4 million kids qualifying, where there are now virtually universal charter schools, private schools, religious schools, and even public school is an option. But it is the parents' choice. And guess what, everybody? In Arizona, wait till you see this program. They just rolled it out late last year, and it's working beautifully. The only people that are freaked out are the school unions and the big, the $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 salary folks out there. They're the only ones who are upset because the kids are getting a great education. It's paid for. They basically get private schools. And guess what? When the schools have to compete for the parents' business and the students' business, they've got to get good at what they do. And you know what? The parents will not tolerate this nonsense, guys, this nonsense about transgenderism, gender identity, climate change worry, on and on. These terrible liberal ideas that were never right in the first place and still aren't right. And bottom line, all you have to do right now is do what Arizona did. Do what the state of Arizona is doing. Just like Ron DeSantis. If you want to run a state, well, just do what Ron DeSantis is doing. So there's my little rant that indeed we can reform the education system, and we can reform it tomorrow. And the only people who are going to be upset are the politicians, the special interests, the lobbyists, and the $200,000 salary folks. So there you go. I'll get off my soapbox now, okay?
It's great. It's great, Greg. And the most important thing is that tax dollars are allocated to education follow the student. So they're not being discriminated against. And, that's a real important factor, because a lot of times they'll give the parents the option, but they have to double dip because, or they have to pay twice because they won't allow those funds to follow the student to a private school.
Isn't it funny where we hear, we hear every day, we hear every day, my body, my choice. Well, how about my family, my kid, my choice? You know?
I like that, Greg.
There you go, Val.
Money follows the child. That's good. And just to weigh in on Alberta perspective, that solution was put before Danielle Smith early when it happened in Arizona, because Donald Trump came to Arizona and he said, all eyes are the world and our nation is watching Arizona and what's rolling out of here when it comes to parental rights. And he's a man of his word. Just like that, Danielle Smith was watching that. She was confronted with that, and parents said, hey, they're doing this in Arizona. Why can't we do this here? And she just, pushed it under the rug. Well, we'll have to watch it. We'll watch it and see how it goes. So I think that's definitely a hot ticket button item that impacts many families. Parents want their children to have a future and to have a better future than what they have. And I don't know what Alberta parent you can't talk to today that isn't looking at their life saying, oh, I want more for my kids than what we have right now.
You know what?
I'd like to go back a little bit. Go ahead.
When I was in the legislature, of course, the ATA, the Alberta Teachers Association, claimed that they're not a union. They're just an association, but they're the most powerful lobbying union in the province. They lobby every member every day. And the members who they lobby, they make offerings, concessions, et cetera, et cetera. They used to come to my office. I had them in there at least 2 or 3 times a week. And I finally told them, you are absolutely wasting your time coming here. I totally disagree with the ATA, with their power, their influence. And I said, I I've little respect for unions because it's all they're doing is doubling up on all the rules and regulations that have already been passed by the governments. It's not like they're in the kids in the coal mines in England back in the 1700s. They have all the protection they need through government regulation, too much government regulation. So I said, don't darken my door again. But they are extremely powerful in Alberta. And I think that those members up there need to grow a backbone and tell the ATA that they're not going to follow directives anymore and that they're going to move in a different direction and come up with a different plan. And the plan that Greg laid out here is the perfect solution.
I agree. It is really good. Gordon, I'm hoping that you can comment on the healthcare catastrophe that's happening across Canada. There's something I know little about. It's called MSI. What is MSI? And walk us through what it was, what it is, and could it have a rebirth?
Well, in the 40s, the College of Physicians and there was another group, but the College of Physicians was one of the groups, and they organized and started a company called Medical Services, Inc. It was voluntary. It was very cheap. It was organized and formed by the doctors, and you could join the MSI group, and it was like a shared cost, and that MSI was extremely cheap at the time. And then along came the federal government. They could see the potential of this system, and so they came and they basically took it over from the Alberta doctors. This Medical Service Inc. was taken over. They bought them out, and then they promised when they did that the Alberta healthcare wouldn't go up, and it was taken over by the federal government, the federal Medicare system, healthcare system. And within 2 months, the cost of medical insurance doubled. So they were good to their word. They did what all governments do. They lied about it and doubled the price of it. So it was an outstanding program. Interestingly, my dad was a very ambitious farmer, and he was pretty bright. And I remember my dad telling me at the table, he said, that's the end of cheap health care. From now on, he said, you watch and see what it has. He said, this health care is going to skyrocket. And it did. So where's the health system today in Canada? It's absolutely collapsing. And I think it's like 30% or 40% of every tax dollar goes towards the health system, and the health system is cratering. How can that be? Unless the money's being misused and misplaced. But I have a really good friend from there in Alberta, and he just came down to visit because his daughter's getting married here, and it was really interesting. I just talked to him 2 or 3 days ago. He has to have a knee surgery, and he's having to go to Great Falls, Montana to get his knee surgery because he can hardly walk. He's become an absolute invalid because of his knees, and he needs to be able to do his farm work. So he's made arrangements to have his knee done in Great Falls. I'm not going to tell you the cost, but it's fairly expensive because he's a Canadian, and Alberta Healthcare won't contribute one dime. But he said they've been putting him off for over 3 years to get this surgery. He said every time he goes in, they push it another 6 months out. They push it another 6 months out. He's got to the point now where he's wearing braces just to go out and do his farm work. And he can't tolerate the pain, and he can't do his work. So he's made the decision to pay for it himself, and he's going to have it done in Great Falls. So that tells you a lot about Canadian healthcare.
Wow. That's a quality of life thing that, again, when you look at communism and how it controls it, it seeks to take over. And in Canada, you think of the options you're given when you have a problem, a disease, or a condition. You don't get choices.
No,
You get what the government says you get.
exactly. And if I hate to even bring this up because it's rather disturbing. My father had a heart problem, and it was a valve. He needed a new valve, and he went in and they told him, Leonard, you need a new valve. But we're going to check it again in 6 months. We'll do a second evaluation here. Let's just try and get by the next 6 months, and we'll take a look at it. Well, from the time they told him that they would check it in another 6 months, it was 3 months, and he passed away with a massive heart attack. With this medical system in the United States that everybody wants to, and it's not, it's got lots of flaws. But if you've got a heart condition in the United States, they'll have you in surgery the next morning. They may have you in surgery the same night, but they will repair your heart. And so it looks to me like they've decided that one of the ways that they can control their costs is they keep pushing this stuff out, and they hope in the meantime that you pass away. And I was watching one of the programs here the other night on, I think it was Newsmax down here. And they showed a clip from a commercial in Canada where the federal government is running a commercial to encourage people that are having major health issues, et cetera, to take their own life. They're encouraging them to commit suicide or to have someone administer something that would take their life. And that commercial was shown here on a United States program. And that's what the Trudeau administration is doing now. And that's because they don't have the funds to take care of the health needs of Canadians. And that's what communism ends up being. That's the end solution in communism. The people are expendable.
So this is the part of the show where it really hits home on what are you going to do today when you hear an example like that. And what you're referencing, Gordon, is that it's the MAID program. That's what it's called. And was medical assistance in death. And you push 5 on your phone. There was a resident in Saskatchewan who had exposed that program. How sad.
It is really sad. And that's what people don't understand about communism. Communism, when you're no longer able to be a producer within the system, you become expendable. And that's a fact. And we're seeing that more and more in countries all over the world that I better not get into the jab. But if you're not a productive member of the system, you're expendable. Communism is a dark, dark place. When I was in politics, I used to compare communism with the free market system, and I always talked about in the free market system, you have pride, productivity, and prosperity. Those are the 3 things that transpire from a free market as individuals. You have personal pride. You go out and you produce and you contribute prosperity to your family, to the community. In communism, there's no pride because you're being told what to do. You don't have choices. Everything you do is forced on you. You're told what your level of education can be. You're told what position you'll play in any job you're given. And when you're no longer able to do that job, then you're no longer important to the state. And people need to start to figure it out.
So where do we go from here? What do we do now? Because it's pretty hopeless. I know that's what's happening in Alberta. I talk to many families who say, look around. Who am I supposed to go to? What politician or party has my back? There are a bunch of pushovers in the conservative movement. So what advice do you have? Where in the world, who cares about victims of communism right in Alberta? Who cares about those people?
Well, I think that we need to get back to the old days, and I know I sound like an old guy, and I'm a little bit old, but at one time, family was the mainstay in taking care of each other. The first level of support was always the family. You took care of each other. You didn't really rely on the government, and that's the problem. We've become dependent on the government through incremental changes in the laws. All of a sudden, the government's taking care of this for us, they're taking care of that for us, and now we're totally dependent on the government. We need to get back to where we're dependent on family members to take care of each other. If you're sick, you help your family. The next level would be the church. And of course, the communists want to destroy the church because they want to be able to control individuals. But the church always stepped in, and that was the next level of support. The last level of support should be the government, whether it's provincial or federal. That should be the last level of support. We need to get back to those old-fashioned ideas that actually worked and help people get through life without always having to depend on the government. Because anytime you depend on the government, there are strings attached. I don't care what the program is. My dad hated quotas. He hated the government telling him what to grow, what not to grow, how much he should get for his product. In the meantime, they're selling the product for twice as much as they're paying my dad. So we need to abandon this idea that the government is the end-all, be-all. And we need to start relying on each other. We need to rely on God, most importantly. And we need to get God back into our lives.
Amen. I agree. I'm thinking of the listeners that are going to hear this broadcast and they say there's nothing left for me here. There's no future here. And they want to leave. They want to go to a free market enterprise. They want to go to the land of the free and the home of the brave. That's not in their cards. It's not very easy. If we kind of peel back immigration issues between Canadians wanting out, wanting to leave, there's bureaucracy in the mix. So what do we do?
The first thing that needs to happen is Albertans, Saskatchewan, the Western province need to realize the Confederation was stacked against them from the beginning. I just listened to Danielle last night or this morning in one of her. She did an interview with one of the professors there, I think from the U of A. But in it, she said, in her interview, she said, we need to get back to where Confederation is aligned in the manner that it was intended. She said the federal government had their powers, the provinces had their powers, and we need to get back to that, where we have sovereignty as a province, just as the federal government has sovereignty as a federal entity. And she said if we can get that back, where the federal government respects provincial sovereignty, then we can move ahead. Kind of that was the gist of her conversation. But she's dead wrong. When I heard her say that, I thought, you don't understand that that's not the problem. The problem is your sovereignty is worth nothing when the federal government really has full control the way the system was set up. The Canadian Charter, or the Canadian BNA Act, was set up just as exactly the same way as the old British colonial system. And the outlying countries were intended to provide cheap labor and cheap raw resources. And those resources were to go back to the motherland, and there's where the wealth would remain. And that's the way Canada was set up, and people don't understand it. It was always intended that Ontario and Quebec would be the power base, and that the hinterland, Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, would be hewers of wood and drawers of water, and they would forever send their materials to the central government to be turned into product and then sold back to the slaves in the hinterland. And that's still where we are. If they are not prepared to change that system, I don't care about Alberta's sovereignty. They don't have a hope in the end. They are still going to be slaves to the central system. And the only alternative is for the province of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and I'll deal with Alberta, is for them to become the 51st state. That's their best hope.
How do
Val?
they walk it out? Yes, Greg.
Oh, thank you. Is my mic still sounding okay?
You sound
Cool.
You
great.
sound great.
I just can't believe what red meat awesome conversation has been. I wanted to just interject a couple of things because you guys are on some really, really cutting edge questions and answers. And what I'll interject is socialism and communism. It doesn't come up all in one day. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Okay, and it's what we're witnessing. Long story short of what we've been summarizing here, really in the last hour of this awesome radio. You guys know me. I like to go to solutions, or I like to go to, for example, a single question that would get to the point or to the heart of a situation. And as I was listening to you guys, I thought, Danielle Smith's name came up, and as Gordon here, I've been listening to not every word, but a lot of words, and a lot of programs, a lot of principles that she's been putting out in the last couple of weeks. And I won't even comment yet on that. But my question would simply be, and you've heard me ask this before, guys. Okay, I'd have one simple question for Danielle Smith. Okay, all BS aside, as we say in the hockey world, all BS aside. If over 60% of registered Alberta voters today voted for Alberta to become the 51st state of the United States, and we could do it, no objections, okay, no complications here. Would you support that and vote yes? Secondly, would you, Danielle Smith, would you immediately implement an educational system to model the state of Arizona in the United States? Because you can do it tomorrow. Yes or no? And then number 3, and this was featured on page 31 of that happy book, everybody, Why I Came to America and What I Think Now, where I addressed healthcare. And this, I didn't even know when I published this chapter, which has got rave reviews, amazing reviews. I never even heard of MSI, Val. So I was as much educated by Gordy's feedback. But once again, we go to a Greg's List solution, and that is this. Returning to the MSI type of business model, and hand in hand of what Gordy identified earlier about school vouchers, is that the key is to have the government money follow the parents or the patients. In other words, get rid of the middleman. And literally deal directly with the parents, and including the funding. Cut the fat. And there are existing models out there. Here's a little scoop for people. I've researched it heavily, and I dealt with them for 3 or 4 years myself. The medical world out there just has to do exactly what Kaiser Permanente does. I know in Washington State, and I assume in California, it was just the most phenomenal healthcare I've ever received in my life. Everything was under one roof. No notice, like Gordy will tell you. MRI, less than 24 hours notice. Dental in-house, X-rays in-house. Their system at lower no cost. We can do this if we have healthcare funds go directly to the patient, where we have control. We cut out all the middlemen. We cut out all the pharmaceutical grease fire. It's a grease fire what we have paid out to the pharmaceutical companies in the United States. So that said, would Danielle Smith, should 60% of voters in Alberta request a voucher type of program for healthcare as well? Yes or no? And then I think you get right down to it. Because if you go a referendum, Val, and Gordon Kessler, you go a true, honorably held and delivered referendum amongst legal registered voters in the province of Alberta or the state of Arizona or elsewhere. That's the will of the people. And my number is always 60%. It can be 50-50, but my number is always 60% to show the true will of the people. So with Danielle Smith, yes or no on those three questions. And I'll turn the mic back to either of you here.
Well, I think, Greg, one thing that they should be doing right now, Danielle Smith should be establishing diplomatic relations with Montana. And there should be a delegation going down there and working directly with Montana, and so that when that date comes, there would be a smooth transition. There's no doubt that Montana is a friend of Alberta and would be willing to, look at all of the options that are being laid out on the table. But I don't think you can start that process too early. I think it needs to start now.
What excellent advice.
Daniel.
And Val, that's hand in hand with what you were saying earlier, Val, which is, okay, all this theoretical and politics talk is one thing, but what do we do at the local level and the family level? What do we do? What can we do today to begin moving forward? And Gordon's touching on that beautifully in that, well, let's get Montana involved today and get that conversation going.
Well, definitely talk of a referendum. I think that has to be addressed. One of the questions I get all the time is, well, how can you just have a referendum? Well, a referendum is your right to answer a question for yourself. Why on earth do you think a politician is better equipped to know the answer to what you want than you? Are we that far gone? We really have to hold what rights we do have left. We need to hold them and stand on them. And a referendum is one of them. And if there is even one politician that would actually say, you can't answer that question, I'm better equipped than you are to answer a question about your life, I don't think so. So a referendum, in my opinion, it's inevitable. It's coming, and it's coming fast. And it's a simple question. Do you want to leave Canada? Yes or no? You decide.
Val, you nailed it. And what you're talking about there is participation. You asked me the question, what can Albertans do? What can they do? They're in some cases they're desperate. Well, that desperation needs to become action. It needs to turn into action. Every Albertan who's concerned about the state of the province of Alberta needs to be in touch with their legislative member. And they need to start pressuring them now to move towards that referendum. Every MLA in that province should be being bombarded by his constituents to move toward that referendum now, not 2 years down the road. In fact, in 6 months, it might not even be Danielle Smith that's the premier. So they need to act. They need to act now. I mean, time is of the essence. I'm an old separatist, and I always thought separation was the way to go. But I think the process of separation is too cumbersome now. I think they need to join the United States because the system is already in place. They don't have to start putting together their own military, their own financial institutions, all of the organizations that it takes to run a province or a state. All of those things are already in place. And it would just be a matter of converting that U.S. state system over to the province. They would have their own constitution. I mean, that's huge. They could write their own constitution and determine their own future. They wouldn't have Trudeau down there determining what their future is going to be. They could manufacture their own future. And that's what needs to happen.
When we get into the solutions phase of this, like right now, I just have to say this is how you combat communism, with joy. And it's the holiday season. You're going to be spending time with friends and family, and these discussions are so vital. Families can be repaired, they can be united, and you can dream. You have to start dreaming again. As cliche as it sounds, you have to dream, and dream for a better future, and want it and hunger for it. And you have to be ready to stand up and decide what side of freedom you stand on.
Well, you're absolutely right. And that's, that's part of the plan of when we come to this planet, we're instructed that we should be, that we should have joy in our lives. And it's a tedious task, but through all of the darkness, absolutely, we need to find joy in the things that we do. And what could be more joyful than doing the things that will protect future generations? It should be an enjoyable experience to march down that path with our friends and family and look forward to a brighter future. And that's one of the things about the free market. It's a place where there is joy and happiness because we're able to produce and reap the benefits of our hard work. So,
I love that. I love that. I want to thank you, Gordon Kessler, for taking the time and just sharing and imparting with this next generation who are rising up. And my co-pilot, my trusted co-pilot, Greg Meekin. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show today. And I hope you guys will come back
Can
again.
I put a little plug in, Val?
Of course.
I am an author, and I have written a trilogy about spying in the oil and gas industry, which I did for 20 years. Had a number of people that worked for me. And so the trilogy is based on those years of spying in Alberta. They're kind of a Tom Clancy novel. And then I have a new one out. It's called Cowboys and Cadillac, because the only things I know in life basically are spying and cowboying. So there's my plug. They can go to GKI Spy. It's just GK, the letter I, and then Spy, and they can look my work up.
Your first book I've read, Wolverine Hills. It is fantastic. So I encourage you to get the books. I'm going to put the link on our website. And Greg Meekin, your book is like due. Your fourth book is coming out when?
It's past due. You know what? I'm putting a date on it. It's going to come out by January 3rd. And there's a lot behind that date that I won't get into, but January 3rd, barring any Joe Biden supply side issues or, but it's actually, it's going to be fun. I may actually, Val, and this doesn't surprise you, I held off on this fourth book till after the election, and I'm really glad I did. Because without even spilling the beans here, I think we're going in different directions than we ever would have dreamed of even a year ago. But that said, a quick plug, absolutely positively, for Gordon's work. As he mentioned, he's done an espionage scout trilogy, which is scouts or spies for the oil industry and the oil rigs. I am absolutely fascinated with his work. As you, Val, I read Wolverine Hills, espionage scout. It was great. I finished Max. And I'm now working on Arctic Revenge, and they are simply books that you want to go back to. They're fiction, but they're based on Gordon's actual boots on the ground experience for a couple of decades, I believe. Right, Gordy, as basically an oil industry scout and spy. And on my end, as far as my book coming out, and I actually do have a small handful of copies of my third one, Val, Why He Came to America and What I Think Now. That's the one that you've read over, I think, 6 or 8 times by now. And actually, I found I have a small handful of copies left. So if people do want a copy, they can go to gregmeekin.com. That's just my name, which is GREGMEAKIN.com. As you know, Val, and you can attest, my website's just packed full of stuff. Not only my full bio, but everything I've written really in the last 5 or 10 years, including a lot of stuff I've published about Alberta 51, which, as you too, I believe that's the only game in town now. That's the only thing to do. The two things I keep hearing, and I apologize for this long sign off, but I know Gordy's got a little bit of time left, and I just so appreciate the time. But the thing I hear every day, Val and Gordon, every single day, from regular Americans and especially my Canadian friends in Alberta, what I hear every day is that could never happen. We've kind of given up hope. Was there any hope for any of this? And I hear this all the time, and I hear it down in the States. I hear people throwing up their hands saying, is there any hope for the States? It's a grease fire down here, even though the evening news won't tell you. So that said, I hear people say, it's the title of my 4th book is, can we even fix this mess? And the long story short is, not only yes, but hell yeah. Hell yeah. But we can do it by bringing in the thoughts and concepts we've talked about today. There's not an issue today that's not dealt with in my book. I humbly say I don't just talk. You guys know I like solutions. And there's solutions for everything we're talking about today. And I prayed from the bottom of my heart, I pray that there's a turnaround in this country, a cultural turnaround, a speaking up, a First Amendment, a getting rid of the thought police, the language police, the government oppression, the lockdowns. I pray that never becomes part of our culture again, and that we can move on to really a more just happy, free, joyful, healthy United States of America, including Alberta 51. So there you go.
I love
Val,
it.
thanks so much for having me on. I've got to run, so I just want to thank you so much for having me on, and interesting conversation.
Well, the pleasure was mine. Thank you so much, and God bless you, Gordon, and all your work that you have done from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. So I will let you sign off, and Greg.
Well, Merry Christmas to you and all of your listeners.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to you. And
I'm going to close. Sorry, I'm talking over you. I was going to close with our favorite sheriff's famous words. Fear not, do right.
Beautiful.